celestial objects would align in a specific way, so free souls of the dead, entombed in the Newark earthworks, could begin their journey to the realm of the dead. This only happened on the summer solstice, when the moon reached either its maximum or minimum standstill, and the path of souls touched the horizon.
From the river to the valley to the sea, all the places, all the people that you can meet.
Welcome to the Mississippi Valley Traveler Podcast. I'm Dean Klinkenberg, and I've been exploring the deep history and rich culture of the people and places along America's greatest river, the Mississippi, since 2007. Join me as I go deep into the characters and places along the river, and occasionally wander into other stories from the Midwest and other rivers. Read the episode show notes and get more information on the Mississippi at MississippiValleyTraveler.com. Let's get going. Welcome to episode 82 of the Mississippi Valley Traveler Podcast. Well, I've got something a little different for you today. A few years ago, I was doing a lot of research trying to piece together the history of indigenous communities along the Mississippi, particularly before the arrival of the first Europeans. And I went pretty deep. I read a lot of articles and some books, and where possible, I accessed Native American historians or tribal histories. But for the most part, I think the research came from anthropologists. So I spent a lot of time on this, like I said, and I pieced together a fairly lengthy description of the history of Native American communities along the Mississippi. So that's what we're going to do today. I ended up putting that into a book chapter that I never published anywhere. So rather than letting that wither away on a hard drive somewhere, I'm going to read you the chapter today to give you a sense of the broad history of indigenous people along the Mississippi. A couple of notes, like I do my best with the pronunciations, so I think I got most of them pretty close, hopefully not embarrassingly bad, but I think they're pretty close. And I know, like, technically in Spanish, when you see a name like Hernando de Soto, you would refer to his last name as Soto. I notice some academics are doing that in their writings these days, which is technically correct. But, you know, we're also used to calling that man De Soto. I'm just going to continue to do that, even though I know it's not technically correct. So pardon that varying away from convention. Well, and I can't help but offer one more caveat. Of course, keep in mind that everything I described is the accumulation of informed guesses. We don't really know all the details of the lives of the people who lived along the Mississippi River before everything was written down and posted on Instagram. So keep that in mind. Some of this is prone to change and may change over time. And I also want to remind you that I have talked about Poverty Point in a previous episode. If you go back to episode 14, if you missed that one, I chatted with Diana Greenlee, mostly about Poverty Point, but we touched a little bit on Watson Break as well. Also, a quick note. Boy, the episode ran a lot longer than I thought it was going to. It's probably going to be about an hour and a half of finished narration. So I'm going to split it into two parts. So today you'll get part one, which will cover from roughly the end of the Ice Age until just before Cahokia emerges. So in 2 weeks, I'll run part two. Also, a quick update about my travel memoir, Better Safe Than Sorry. It officially releases on August 25th. Right now, you can pre-order the ebook in most of the digital marketplaces. If you want to know more about the book, just go to deanklinkenberg.com/bettersafethansorry. You'll find the full sales description there. On August 25th, then you'll also be able to purchase print editions of it. I have not been able to figure out how to set up pre-orders for print books as an indie author. It's not something Amazon allows. So for now, you can just order the ebook if that's what you're interested in. But if you think you're going to want a physical copy, then that will go live on August 25th. I had a chance to go into some detail talking about this book with my brother on his podcast, the Messy City podcast. So if you check that out, he's on Spotify and Substack and a bunch of places. Just look for the Messy City podcast with Kevin Klinkenberg, and you can hear the two of us talking about that book and the idea of fear and trying to work past our fears, especially the ones that are really limiting our lives. And I'll also mention I had a chance to chat with Vance and Baz on the Written on the Edge podcast, or WROTE. They're all over the usual podcast platforms, including YouTube. Mostly talked about murder on the Mississippi, but we also talked briefly about Better Safe Than Sorry, the new travel memoir. So check that one out too. Thanks to all of you who continue to show me some love through Patreon. I deeply appreciate the ongoing support. For as little as $1 a month, you can join the community where you get early access to all of the episodes. If you're interested in joining, go to patreon.com/Dean Klinkenberg and you'll find it there. If you're not really into Patreon, you can buy me a coffee. It can help pay for my caffeine habit. That's important as well. That caffeine fuels so much of my creativity, so I appreciate every little bit that helps me keep that going. If you want to know how to do that, go to MississippiValleyTraveler.com/podcast, and there you will find a link to buy me a coffee. And in that same place, MississippiValleyTraveler.com/podcast, you'll find a listing of all previous 81 episodes. Click on one to listen to it or to check out the show notes. You'll be able to access the show notes for this episode, for example, where I will have a few links to tourism sites that preserve the history of indigenous communities along the Mississippi, and maybe one or two other things. So that's at MississippiValleyTraveler.com/podcast for all of those previous episodes and their show notes. And now, let's get on with the podcast. Part 1. Creation. In Dakota Indian tradition, a bidote is a place where two bodies of water become one. For the Dakota people, one bidote in particular rises in importance above the rest, the place where the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers become one. This is the place where life began. Until 20,000 years ago, mountains of ice, glaciers, covered bidote. As the ice melted, water filled a vast basin northwest of bidote, forming a great body of water we now call Glacial Lake Agassiz. Water eventually overtopped a bank along the lake's southeast corner, blasting open a hole and sending torrents of water ripping through the land, creating a river we call Glacial River Warren. This new river carved a deep valley that the Minnesota River flows through today. In central Minnesota, Glacial River Warren merged with a much smaller river, the Mississippi. Their combined flow merged into an old channel of the Mississippi River at St. Paul, then scoured out the sediment of the old channel until it hit bedrock. This formed a great waterfall, Warren Falls, as monumental as Niagara Falls. Over time, the falls retreated from their birthplace at today's St. Paul, eventually splitting into two at Bidote. One branch continued up the Minnesota River for 2 miles before leveling out. The other branch continued up the Mississippi River to Minneapolis, where they are today, 5 miles above Bidote. The Dakota Indians called these falls Owamena, and Ojibwe Indians called it Kakabika. We know it today as St. Anthony Falls, the name given them by the Belgian-born Franciscan priest Louis Hennepin in the 17th century. When the first people arrived in Minnesota, Glacial River Warren still flowed through the state. They probably stood on the banks and marveled at the big river and its great falls. The first Minnesotans arrived as the climate was warming and life was returning to areas previously buried under thousands of feet of ice. Birds circled in the sky, dropping seeds they'd carried from other places that sprouted into green plants in the sand and gravel. Woolly mammoth and mastodons roamed into the area. In a sense, life really did begin at this confluence, at Bidote. Those early people were mobile, traveling in small groups of a couple dozen people, extended families in all likelihood, accompanied by a few pet dogs. They faced many obstacles as they adapted to a world reawakening. Huge lakes and rivers roaring with frigid water blocked travel routes. Emerging spruce, fir, boreal forests supported limited plant and animal life, so food could be hard to find. Megafauna, like those woolly mammoth and mastodons, hunted for food and hides, would soon disappear. Still, the people managed. By 9,000 years ago, the continental ice was a distant memory. The climate had warmed, and rains came less frequently. Prairies and savannas spread as the boreal forests retreated. The flow of the Mississippi slowed as it carried less water and dropped sediment that slowly covered bedrock and raised the channel higher. Some people moved into the Mississippi bottomlands to live, building communities on the islands that developed out of Kingston Terrace near Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin. Stone tools for activities like grinding, chopping, and cutting made the tasks of daily life easier, and the Mississippi Valley was rich in stone, especially in western Wisconsin, where people harvested rock like cock and chert from ridgetops. In northern Minnesota, family groups spent summers in the grasslands, then moved on in late summer to Lake Itasca, where they hunted bison with stone-tipped spears, taking advantage of the boggy soil that slowed the bison's gallop. After the animals were butchered, the meat was smoked and dried, the hide scraped and tanned. People celebrated their success with a feast, then moved on to their winter homes in caves or forests in the region. In spring, they returned to Lake Itasca to catch fish and turtles, then moved back to the grasslands for summer. Their contemporaries further south lived in the grassy plains and savannas of Arkansas and near the oak and hickory forests of the lower Mississippi Valley. For generations, those people knew a Mississippi River that flowed down a braided channel that cut through a dense complex of wet and dry wilderness. As the river carried less water, its channel evolved into a restless waterway that meandered through the soft soil. The first people in the southern part of the valley were probably also small bands of hunters and gatherers. They lived off the abundant white-tailed deer, rather than bison, and collected nuts and berries from the forests. They were among the first to shape stone into adzes, a useful tool for sculpting wood. It's likely that these people used adzes to carve dugout canoes to travel on the area's waterways, maybe even on the Mississippi. Down where the river ends, at the Gulf of Mexico, people lived off the rich coastal resources of the Mississippi Delta, where oysters and fish were abundant. Rising sea levels forced them to relocate occasionally. The Gulf rose 30 feet over 4,000 years, until sea levels stabilized about 4,000 years ago. Populations grew steadily along the Mississippi Valley, and people narrowed the world in which they lived, returning to the same places each season to hunt, eat, and raise their children. By 5,000 years ago, people near the middle and lower Mississippi had generally shifted from a forest-dependent lifestyle to living off the bounties of big rivers in their floodplains. They were also learning how to domesticate plants, starting with a bottle gourd in the family Kiokerbaceae, which includes honeymelon, cucumber, squash, and pumpkin. It's possible seeds of Kiokerbaceae first reached North America by floating across the Atlantic Ocean from Africa. Not long after that, people also domesticated sunflower, marsh elder, chenopod, erect knotweed, and maygrass. Cultivating these plants provided a more reliable source of food and enabled wanderers to spend more time in one location. Part 2. Order from Chaos. In much of North America, people believed life existed in three planes. The upper or sky world, where the Creator lived, along with Sun Woman, Thunderbirds, and Falcon Man. Birds and other winged creatures called it home. In the upper world, perfect order and stability ruled. The below world existed underwater and was a chaotic place, unpredictable and prone to spawn madness. The below world, though, balanced the order of the upper world. The below world was also the source of the fertility that created human life and abundant crops. The great serpent lorded over water creatures like frogs, snakes, fish, and lizards. In between the upper and lower worlds was this world, the place where humans lived, a place they shared with animals and plants. This world floated on water, or the back of a turtle, and many Native American cultures have creation stories that describe how this world came to be. In Anishinaabe legend, for example, infighting led the Kichi-Manitou, the Great Mystery, to purify the earth by sending a great deluge. The only human to survive was Nanabuju, who shared the watery world with a few animals who were very good swimmers and flyers. Nanabuju, floating on a log, was unable to find land, so he swam to the bottom to bring up a handful of mud to create new land. He couldn't reach the bottom, though, and neither could other animals. The loon, the helldiver, the mink, the turtle, they all failed. Finally, soft-spoken Wajushk, the muskrat, volunteered to try. Wajushk was gone so long that he was presumed dead, which he was. When Wajushkut's body floated to the surface, though, Nanabuju spotted a clump of mud in his paw. Wajushk, muskrat, had sacrificed his life to retrieve that clump of dirt. Nanabuju placed the mud on the back of a turtle, the four winds all blew at once, and a large island grew in the middle of the water that we now call North America. Other indigenous nations tell similar stories about what has been labeled the earth diver. These creation stories might have been the inspiration for the earliest earthworks in North America. Indigenous people in North America built monumental structures for thousands of years. Large earthworks were once a common sight, especially near big rivers like the Mississippi. These ancient sites would be far more famous today if those early North Americans had built with stone instead of with soil. The earliest known earthworks in the Mississippi Valley were built in present-day Louisiana. At Watson Brake, early Americans built 11 mounds in an oval pattern, each connected by a low ridge. Work on the mounds began around 3500 BCE, which stands for before the Common Era, and continued over 5 centuries. Those early Americans built their first mound nearly a millennium before the first pyramid rose in Egypt and 500 years before tribes in England moved the first rocks to create Stonehenge. Watson Brake was built on a slight rise near the Washita River, about 80 miles west of the Mississippi. The mounds weren't used for burials, and while the site was used all year, it's not clear that it was occupied year-round. The mounds may have been built as a way to unify people in the area. They're aligned with the summer and winter solstice, so they may have been a place for people to come together during important times of the year to mark important seasonal transitions. Still, archaic-era hunter-gatherers weren't supposed to be capable of organizing the resources to build structures of that size and complexity. Yet, they did. There are 13 known mound sites in Louisiana and Mississippi that date to that same period, although there are no known connections between them. In subsequent generations, though, impressive trade networks developed, much of it facilitated by travel on the Mississippi River. Copper reached the Mississippi Valley from upper Michigan, some of which was used to create elaborate personal ornaments. Seashells flowed in from the coast, flint from North Dakota, and obsidian from Wyoming. In addition to growing trade networks, people increasingly milled grains and nuts, and formal burials became more common. After Watson Brake, mound construction ceased for several centuries. The next known earthworks were built around 1700 BCE at a place known as Poverty Point. Separated from Watson Brake by 60 miles and 1,000 years, we haven't yet found evidence that the two mound-building cultures were connected. Poverty Point sits 15 miles west of the Mississippi River atop Mason Ridge, 130 miles of elongated high ground bordered by swamps and forests that the Mississippi River flooded seasonally. The community at Poverty Point covered a few square miles, but its influence spread throughout the lower Mississippi Valley and southeast. The earliest structures at Poverty Point included a mound and a plaza covered with several large circular structures. 200 years later, the people of Poverty Point radically reshaped their physical world. That first mound was essentially abandoned, and the plaza cleared and covered. A new mound was built, followed by a series of 6 semi-elliptical terraces. Shortly after that, the people of Poverty Point built a massive structure called Mound A. the second largest earthen structure in North America. Only Monk's Mound in Cahokia is larger. This massive reconstruction was completed rapidly. The terraces were built in a single generation. Even more remarkable, Mound A was probably completed in just 90 days, a feat that would have required perhaps 4,000 people to accomplish. Building these structures required the ability to organize, feed, and house a large labor force. While there's no evidence that they grew their own food, they probably didn't need to. The area around them was abundant with life. The waters teemed with fish, which they caught with nets. The people of Poverty Point also developed a distinctive technology for cooking. They hand-molded loess, wind-blown soil, into shapes like balls or ropes, then baked them in a fire to make them solid. Most were an inch or two in diameter. They were warmed, then dropped into a fire pit, probably dozens at once, where they helped regulate heat. It's possible that the different shapes produced slightly different heating properties. Some might have created more intense heat, for example, while others might have remained hotter for longer. The people of Poverty Point traded with other groups of people who lived hundreds of miles away, relying on the web of rivers and streams to reach them. From the bluff line along Bayou Mason, a person could have paddled to the Washita Mountains in central Arkansas, to the Ozarks of eastern Missouri, or to the Shawnee Hills in southern Illinois, all without a single portage. From what we can tell, their trade networks worked mostly one way. Tons of stone were imported to Poverty Point, but there's no evidence that Poverty Point was exchanging any material objects in return. They fashioned those imported stones into an impressive range of tools that they used for scraping, cutting, drilling, hunting, and for personal fashion. Why would a group of people who lived off what they could hunt and collect come together in such large numbers to build mounds and terraces? That answer has been elusive. There's no evidence that a central leader organized and dominated at Poverty Point. To the contrary, they looked like they were an egalitarian, cooperative society. In recent years, some scientists have suggested that Poverty Point was a site for collective worship, a place of pilgrimage that attracted the reverent rather than an economic center. Archaeologist Tristram Kidder speculated that, quote, the building of this earthwork represents an enactment of ritual where the builders covered the watery chaos of pre-creation and erected a monument symbolizing the triumph of creation over the forces of chaos. In other words, the act of building up, of moving and layering dirt into mounds in an area surrounded by water, was a way for those ancient people to reenact their creation story, much in the way that Catholics recreate a ritual from the Last Supper every week when they participate in communion. Archaeologist John Gibson, who spent much of his career studying Poverty Point, arrived at a similar conclusion. Gibson speculated that the structures of Poverty Point may have been built to represent ancient symbols of creation and the universe. Even though people in the Southeast spoke many different languages and had their own unique cultures, they probably shared many beliefs about the spiritual realm. The geometric patterns at Poverty Point, for example, represented life as an eternal loop that connected birth and death. The rings were open to the east to welcome the Creator each morning, and closed to the west and north to block the bad spirits that came from those directions. The site was laid out carefully along a north-south axis, and in alignment with solstices and other cosmic events, creating what archaeologist William Romaine called a cosmic center, a place centered around the cardinal directions where the upper and lower worlds converged, where people carefully observed the changing of the seasons. The entire place feels like it was meant to bring people together. For 200 years, people came together at Poverty Point. Then, mysteriously, they abandoned it. Again, we don't know why, although its decline in importance may have been driven by changes in the climate. Some 300 years ago, the region got significantly wetter and cooler. The Gulf Coast was probably hit by more frequent and more severe hurricanes. An increase in flood intensity and duration would have disrupted trade networks and may have made it harder to collect food. People may just have decided that life in the floodplains was no longer tenable, so they migrated out to prairies and savannas to start anew.
Hey,
Dean Klinkenberg here, interrupting myself. Just wanted to remind you that if you'd like to know more about the Mississippi River, check out my books. I write the Mississippi Valley Traveler guidebooks for people who want to get to know the Mississippi better. I also wrote The Wild Mississippi, a guide that goes deep into the complex ecosystems supported by the Mississippi, the plant and animal life that depends on them, and where you can go to experience it all. If you like fiction, check out my Frank Dodge Mystery Series. Each book is set in places along the Mississippi River. My newest book is a travel memoir called Better Safe Than Sorry: Slow Boats, Chicken Buses, and the Radical Choice to Trust the World. The book explores a simple question. What happens when you stop asking, what if something goes wrong, and start asking, what if everything goes right? Find out more at deanklinkenberg.com/bettersafethansorry. Part 3. A Path Across the Sky. In many Native American cultures, people believed that a human had at least two souls. One soul fueled life but had no consciousness. Extinguish it, and the body died. Each person also had a soul that combined the essence of who they were, what some cultures called a free soul. When a person died, or dreamed, or was ill, the free soul could leave the body. After death, the free soul would have to complete a difficult journey to reunite with ancestors in the realm of the dead. The road from this world to the realm of the dead followed an elongated ribbon of stars that bends around the horizon that they called the Path of Souls, what we now know as the Milky Way. The journey to unite with the ancestors was long and difficult, and there was not even a guarantee that a free soul would successfully enter the Path of Souls. For many indigenous people in the southern U.S., for example, a free soul had to travel west to where the sun set, to the edge of the Earth disk, and wait for the right moment to jump onto the Path of Souls. This was only possible for a few minutes from late November through April, when stars in the shape of a hand, part of Orion, touched the horizon, which enabled the free soul to make the leap. For other Native Americans, the Path of Souls could only be entered through specific portals in this world, such as Ohio's Sugarloaf Mountain, Trempealeau Mountain along the upper Mississippi River, or maybe through one built specifically by the people for that purpose, such as a mound. Once on the Path of Souls, a free soul would face many obstacles. Finding a way across a big river, or dodging the talons of a giant raptor, or the teeth of a vicious dog. At the end of the path, a great serpent, represented by the constellation Scorpio, with a red jewel in its forehead, the star Antares, guided the entrance to the land of the dead. Souls that successfully navigated all these hazards joined the ancestors in the land of the dead, a place similar to this world, except that it was perpetually pleasant and happy. I mean, who wouldn't like to go there? Centuries ago, people knew a night sky dense with stars and groups of stars. As people got increasingly adept at domesticating plants, they settled into larger communities for longer periods of time. This probably gave them more time to ponder the meaning of those stars and to build increasingly elaborate and complex structures to represent those beliefs. Many stars and features of the sky became highly symbolic. By 1000 BCE, great pine forests were thriving across the northern Mississippi Valley, while along the lower Mississippi, the great river's slower current began carving lazy meanders from the Gulf of Mexico to southern Missouri. While the forests weren't great places to grow crops, the floodplains of those rivers were exceptional. People along the Mississippi and other major rivers had been practicing some form of agriculture since at least 5000 BCE. While maize was grown in eastern North America as early as 200 BCE, it wasn't cultivated widely until 800 CE, CE for Common Era, which is the equivalent of AD, when people created cold, hardier varieties. As people relied more on domesticated plants, they traveled shorter distances and less often for food. Along the upper part of the river, they built seasonal communities in the rich Mississippi bottomlands where they lived during the warmer months. As the weather cooled, they dispersed into smaller groups and moved to the uplands where deer were abundant. As people returned to the same places every year, Some communities grew. They produced pottery to store food and water, and around the same time, they also carved stone pipes for the first time and started to trade some of them. They also began to smoke tobacco. They also reshaped the landscape in remarkable ways to build structures that reflected their views of life, death, and the afterlife. The earliest mounds in the middle and upper Mississippi Basin were built along the Ohio River by a culture that archaeologists call the Adena Hopewell tradition. There's a similar cultural group south of the Ohio River that archaeologists have labeled the Marksville tradition. Between 400 BCE and 400 CE, they built some amazing structures in south central Ohio, including a stunning serpent mound that coils nearly 1,400 feet across the top of a hill. They also built an embanked pathway we know as the Great Hopewell Road that stretched for several miles from the Newark earthworks toward Sugarloaf Mountain. Investigations by William Romaine revealed that the road aligns with one end of the Milky Way on the evening of the summer solstice. The alignment was almost certainly intentional. Once every 9 years, celestial objects would align in a specific way so free souls of the dead entombed in the Newark earthworks could begin their journey to the realm of the dead. This only happened on the summer solstice, when the moon reached either its maximum or minimum standstill, and the path of souls touched the horizon. At that moment, free souls could leave the tomb where their bodies had been buried and follow the Great Hopewell Road to Sugarloaf Mountain, where they would pass through the portal and enter the path of souls. 37 miles southwest of Sugarloaf Mountain, Serpent Mound, the twisting 1,400-foot-long mound, was built on an overlook above Brush Creek in a landscape dotted with sinkholes and bisected by a river, representing the other end of the Milky Way, the entrance to the realm of the dead. The Hopewell-Adena influence extended into the upper Mississippi Valley. People living near present-day Guttenberg, Iowa, for example, built 43 mounds atop a narrow ridge at the confluence of the Turkey and Mississippi rivers. Many of the mounds, which were built beginning around 500 BCE, were burial sites, but one mound that stretched 98 feet across the top of the ridge resembles a panther. Some cultures imagine the ruler of the lower world as an underwater panther rather than a serpent. Many Native Americans in the Midwest, such as the Osage people, believed that the Missouri and Mississippi rivers represented the path of souls in this world. Mounds in the shape of animals were common along the upper Mississippi, with construction peaking around 600 CE. There are many spectacular examples. At Effigy Mounds National Monument, north of Marquette, Iowa, dozens of animal-shaped mounds line the bluff tops overlooking the Mississippi. Most were built between 600 CE and 1150 CE. Birds are a common theme, but some mounds are also shaped like turtles and bison. Perhaps most spectacular is the series of 10 bears that appear to march across the landscape. While it's not a leap to assume that the panther and serpent effigies represent the ruler of the lower world in Native American cosmology, no one is quite sure what these other effigies might represent. Around 1000 CE, another sea change was in the works, one that would reshape life for people along the Mississippi River and far beyond. It would result in some of the largest pre-European earthworks in North America and a population explosion that created one of the continent's great cities near the confluence of North America's two biggest rivers. And we're going to stop there for this episode. Come back in 2 weeks and we'll continue this story with Cahokia and DeSoto's invasion of the Southeast. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to the series on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss out on future episodes. I offer the podcast for free, but when you support the show with a few bucks through Patreon, you help keep the program going. Just go to patreon.com/Dean Klinkenberg. If you want to know more about the Mississippi River, check out my books. I write the Mississippi Valley Traveler guidebooks for people who want to get to know the Mississippi better. I also write the Frank Dodge Mystery Series that's set in places along the river. Find them wherever books are sold. The Mississippi Valley Traveler podcast is written and produced by me, Dean Klinkenberg. Original music by No Offense. See you next time.